Nobody warned me I was going to lose these 10 things when I retired. If you watch this video, you'll be better prepared than I was. The first one of those things is your built-in sense of structure in your life. When you work, your days sort of have a natural rhythm. When you retire early, the structure seems to disappear overnight. You have no fixed start or end to your day, and no external pressure to kind of get things moving. The days can start to blur together, and motivation becomes fully self-generated. And you know what? This is kind of a big shock for a lot of retirees, and is often underestimated. Now that you know, you probably won't underestimate it. The second thing to talk about is you may lose a clear sense of identity. In our society, it's not uncommon for someone to introduce themselves by what they do. When you retire, that disappears overnight. Who you are is no longer what you do. Now it's actually who you are. And that can result in a loss of professional status or recognition. And the emotional shift from being needed at work to being optional at home is hard for some people. This is actually one of the most significant psychological impacts of retirement. The third thing you may lose when you retire is daily social interaction. Work forces human interaction, even when you don't feel like it. When you retire, that goes away, and that's a double-edged sword. Casual friendships sometimes fade, and it takes a lot more intention to maintain them. There's fewer spontaneous conversations, and isolation can creep in pretty quickly. I talked about this in a previous video with Robbie. I was shocked to learn that men over 65 have the highest successful suicide rate. And a lot of that comes from a sense of loneliness or isolation. Loneliness is one of the biggest things that affect a happy retirement. And it ties in strongly with good emotional and mental health. The fourth thing I want to discuss is that you may lose a sense of urgency. And what I'm saying is, when you had a job or when you were working, depending on the job, you may have had some deadlines that you had to meet. And you wanted to answer emails in a timely manner. And you had to get a budget done or whatever it was, depending on your job. When you retire, most of that goes away instantly. And now there's less urgency to grow or maybe even to improve yourself. And there's a lot fewer of externally imposed goals. So you have to kind of take it upon yourself to grow, to motivate yourself to move forward. If you're not careful, the sense of comfort can replace any sort of challenge in your life. And this can be a subtle but very powerful shift. Number 5 often catches people off guard. And that is that when you retire, you often become less stress tolerant. Work stress can be super exhausting. We all know that. But it also builds resilience. Retirees often become less stress tolerant. And that means that smaller problems cause bigger stress when you don't have as many problems to deal with. When you have pressure reps, so to speak, the small things stay small and the big things you deal with so that you don't get overwhelmed. This idea often affects retirees in that they miss actual meaningful stress of work. The sixth thing you may lose is a sense of career ambition, or at least that ambition becomes less important. It's not necessarily bad, but it is a real loss. When you don't have any promotions to consider or you're not trying to climb the career ladder, you have to have something else to replace it so that you don't just kind of wander aimlessly. So you kind of have to redefine your definition of success. Maybe success for you is going to be how can you help your community, or how can you get involved in the church more, whatever it might be. But that career ambition, when it goes away, you feel it when you retire, especially if you retire early. The seventh one is pretty obvious is when you retire early, and that you may lose some financial momentum. And for Robbie and I, this one strikes home quite a bit. I mean, Robbie, as we've talked about in other videos, is more concerned about our financial future than I am. I believe the projections that we have, but I'm not going to lie, when you stop putting money in and that trajectory of your portfolio or your savings starts to come down, that does add to the stress of your life overall. And often when you retire early, you're losing the peak income years of your working life. Therefore, you could have been putting more in those years, and now you're putting zero in, and that is stressful to some, and it leaves less room for problems in the market, or less room for emergencies that may come up, because those things are going to hit you with no income to replace them in your financial portfolio. The eighth thing you may lose may hit some folks really hard, and this is a sense of being needed. Again, I talked about it in one of the other points, but when you're going to work and you're needed at work, at home, maybe you're optional. And for some, that is, you haven't been home, and home has functioned fine when you weren't there. Whether you have a spouse that's picking up the slack, or doing things at home when you were at work. Now you're at home. You just didn't have to be there before. So now you don't have this sense of being needed. And then that reflects on how useful are you, and it's a downward spiral for some. And that's often why some folks return to work at least part-time, because they want to feel needed. You just need to make sure that you're ready for this. And you know what? There's no problem if you do want to go back to work part-time for that sense of need, or for that sense of helping others, whatever it might be. Or maybe you find that sense of or that drive to be needed and being met by volunteering. Whatever it might be, it is something that you may feel when you retire. So I'm 7 months into retirement, and number 9 is one that is surprisingly relevant to me. And that is that time often becomes less precious than you expected. When you have unlimited time to do what you want, time feels cheaper a little bit. Sometimes I find myself procrastinating instead of just getting something done. And I have to be careful that I don't just fall into this I'll do it tomorrow sort of lifestyle. Sometimes a sense of urgency actually gives time meaning. And you know what? That's why sometimes retirees report that, or they feel that time goes so fast, because it just doesn't mean as much when they don't have the deadlines and the sense of urgency. Number 10 on my list kind of helps to frame retirement as a transition that you need to approach with intention, not just something that happens because you have enough money. And it is that you may lose the version of yourself that thrived under pressure. The version that always met the deadline, or the version that never made someone wait for an answer, or the one that could handle any conflict and help other people solve it. You might feel that you're going to lose some cognitive sharpness, and your leadership instincts may soften. So all of those things just say that you need to approach your retirement with intentionality. Have some things in mind that you're going to do to keep yourself sharp, and to maybe be able to lead another organization, whether that's a volunteer organization or whatever it might be. But you have to know that it is going to change, and you don't want to lose that version of yourself. If you liked it, that is, you don't want to lose the version of yourself that thrived on that pressure. All right, so those are 10 things that you may lose when you retire, especially if you retire early. I hope you're giving these things some thought, and if you are on that path to retirement, be intentional about it. Think about the ways that you can prevent these things from having a negative impact on your life overall, and be prepared for them when they come. I appreciate you taking the time to watch the channel. I hope you're subscribed and you like the video and all the things. If I missed anything, or if you're retired already and you've got comments to add, I'd love to hear those. Put them down in the comment section. Thanks for watching this video, and God bless.